Hello, thanks so much for joining us, everyone. My name is Mara Gross, and I am the Oregon Communications Manager with Climate Solutions. I'm going to be facilitating today's webinar. First, a couple of logistical notes. We're using PowerPoint slides, so please log into the Zoom meeting you should have received when you registered, if you haven't already, so you can see those. Audio is sometimes better through phone connections than with Zoom, so if your audio isn't great, try dialing in with your phone. Everyone should be muted automatically except us speakers. We're going to leave time for questions at the end, so please submit questions online through the Zoom meeting as they arise. There's a Q&A button near the top right of your screen, so please feel free to submit those. All right, jumping right in. We'll start with the problem, actually. The coal-fired power is the world's largest contributor to climate change and a major public health hazard. It powers 1/3 of the homes and businesses in Oregon, and there's a long history of activism to stop coal here. Over time, a powerful movement for change has grown. The Sierra Club has long been a leader here, and groups have joined together in the Power Path Coal campaign, which has led successful campaigns to close Oregon's last coal-fired power plant and to stop coal export proposals across the Northwest. And then a few years ago, several organizations came together to create a shared campaign in Oregon called Renew Oregon. The goal has been to protect our victories and to get to the next stage on climate and clean energy. I'll turn it over to our panelists now to tell you about the work the Renew Oregon Coalition has been building. First, we have Kristen Sheeran. She's the Oregon Director for Climate Solutions. She was previously a professor of economics and specializes in climate and energy policy.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm just trying to advance our slide here a little bit.
Left. Oh, that's not working. Apologies.
Hold on just a second.
What just happened?
Those first early technical difficulties. There we go. So I'm just going to kick us off today by giving you an overview of the Renew Oregon campaign victory that we're still really excited about here in Oregon, passage of Oregon's Clean Electricity and Coal Transition Act. But before I do that, I just want to step back a little bit and give you an overview of where we're going to go today in our presentation. Winning on a nationally significant piece of climate and clean energy legislation, as we did this session, takes a lot of pre-work and design and hard work and effort from a lot of different organizations collaborating together. To get started, you need to have significant base building and leadership development efforts across the grassroots. And this really was, the Sierra Club's been successfully organizing in our region around coal transition for many, many years. And that groundwork that they laid was, so valuable to our ability to take it over the finish line this past session. But that was also the impetus behind Climate Solutions and Sierra Club and Oregon Environmental Council and Oregon League of Conservation Voters coming together to create a shared campaign infrastructure that became known as Renew Oregon. So that was step one. In winter of 2015, that coalition, again led by Sierra Club and its partners, proposed legislation to the Oregon legislature to essentially take coal out of Oregon's electricity mix and transition to cleaner renewable energy. And we weren't successful with that legislation. So we regrouped, and knowing that there was a strong base of public support in favor of coal transition, Renew Oregon was then able to file some ballot measures in the fall of 2015 that would essentially have put to public vote this issue of Oregon's continued coal usage and the need to transition to clean renewable energy. As a result of filing those ballot initiatives, the two largest utilities in our state, PGE and Pacific Corp, reached out and asked if sitting down together we might not be able to find a shared pathway, an alternative proposal for getting coal out of Oregon's electricity mix and increasing our renewable portfolio standard that would avoid a costly and contentious ballot fight. So we sat down together, and over the course of 6 to 8 weeks, we were able to come up with an alternative legislative proposal, which became known as Oregon's Coal Transition Clean Electricity Act. And that's what we were just able to pass this past winter 2016 session. So let me tell you a little bit about Renew Oregon. Renew Oregon started about 2 years ago at the impetus of Climate Solutions, Oregon Environmental Council, Oregon League of Conservation Voters, and then the Sierra Club, as part of a larger West Coast climate campaign. The idea being that if we look at the really progressive policies on climate and clean energy that have been put in place, in California to our south and in British Columbia to our north, that in Oregon and Washington, we had the opportunity to pass policies that would create a larger market for clean energy and carbon across the West Coast states. And together, from California up through British Columbia, you're looking at the 5th largest economy on the planet. So what we do together as a region here has national and global impact. So that was the impetus of the Renew Oregon campaign, and we set as its goals 3 core policy objectives. First, to pass a clean fuels program in Oregon, essentially a low carbon fuel standard, much like the one that's already in place in British Columbia and California. And Renew Oregon was successful in that effort, as well as successful in defending repeal of that low carbon fuel standard from repeated attempts by the oil industry to roll it back, including a threat to take it to the ballot. Renew Oregon was also set up to get coal out of Oregon's electricity mix and ramp up our renewable energy generation. And we're happy to say we were successful with that just this session. We'll talk more in just a minute. And then the third thing, core priority of Renew Oregon campaign, is to find ways to hold carbon polluters accountable in our region by finding a way to either cap or price carbon. For those of you who are from out of state, which is the vast majority of folks, I believe, who are joining us on the call today, I just want to tell you a little bit about Oregon's greenhouse gas footprint, because it really gives you a better sense of sort of where are the opportunities for action in the region, and it certainly helped frame our strategy and our priorities with the Renew Oregon campaign. So when we look at Oregon, we see that transportation is the largest single source of emissions. It accounts for roughly 36% of Oregon's carbon footprint. And of that transportation sector, about 25% is due to driving cars alone. If we look at the electricity sector, the next largest source of emissions, many people are surprised to learn that Oregon is still very much a coal-powered state. We have one coal plant located in our state, which, thanks to the effort of Sierra Club and Partners, is already scheduled to close by 2020. But Oregon is a large importer of coal power from coal plants located out of state in Wyoming, in Utah, Montana, and other places. Up to 1/3 of the electricity that powers homes and businesses in Oregon is coal-powered. So about 25% of Oregon's emissions comes from coal, 25% comes from cars. So as we look around the state at what are the opportunities to really move the dial on climate, we're looking at cars and coal as our 2 major opportunities. So that's why in Oregon we really take a portfolio approach to our climate action strategies. There are many different things that we need, some sectoral in approach, others economy-wide, that are going to be needed to reach Oregon's ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals, which is to basically get an 80% reduction below 1990 levels by 2050. Matching the 2-degree goal set by many states and nations across the world. So you can see in that, there are many different pieces of the carbon puzzle here in Oregon, some of which we've already made great progress on, like the low carbon fuel standard and the renewable portfolio standard, and others which are still in progress. And so then before I turn this over to Thomas, who's going to tell you about how it is that we were able to achieve such a significant victory in Oregon, let me tell you a little bit quickly about what it is we've actually won. What is the Clean Electricity and Coal Transition Bill really about? Well, the first step deals with coal. And the law basically says that by the year 2030, if not sooner, Oregon's largest utilities have to end their use of coal power in Oregon. So this is significant given the role that coal still plays in Oregon's electricity mix. Then to make sure that that coal power that's currently being used in Oregon isn't simply replaced with natural gas, we increased Oregon's renewable portfolio standard to 50% by the year 2040. This virtually ensures that the coal power that we currently rely on will be replaced by cleaner alternatives like wind and solar. There were some changes to how renewable energy credits are treated under the law. We can go into that in Q&A if anyone's interested. But in addition, we were able to create new opportunities for community solar programs across the state, providing those opportunities to communities who haven't had them before. And we were also able to open up new opportunities for our utilities to invest in EV infrastructure, which of course is a key strategy. Electrifying our transportation sector is a key strategy to meeting our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. So that was the whole package, very ambitious, very broad in scope. And as a result, it's expected to cut emissions from our electricity sector in Oregon by half by the year 2030. It'll reduce Oregon's total greenhouse gas emissions by 15%. And by 2040, we're looking at total net greenhouse gas reductions in excess of 30 million metric tons. And just to put that in perspective, that's equivalent to removing about 6.5 million cars off the road in Oregon. So not insignificant at all. And that's why we're so excited. And now I'm going to turn this over to Thomas, who's going to let you know how we managed to do this.
So let me just introduce Thomas Wheatley. Thomas is the campaign director for Renew Oregon, the state's clean energy campaign. He spent the last 15 years working on progressive policy, education, and political campaigns, including helping to win marriage equality in 9 Western states. Thomas.
Great, thanks, and excited to be on the phone with everybody, and looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to move quickly through a few slides to give folks a feel for how we built this campaign, what we invested in, and what we felt was the most valuable use of our time and energy and resources to help us get the policy over the finish line. A word of background, as we created the Renew Oregon campaign as a big tent under which a number of partners can collaborate, we really tried to focus in on not recreating the wheel, but rather investing in new capacities that supplement the existing infrastructure already on the ground in the state from the partner organizations and businesses that are engaged. So for us, this really meant focusing in a lot of our time and energy at the central campaign on the earned media and digital communications, building a large social media operation, being really aggressive in terms of list building, and investing in a lot of earned media work. And then also that final box on the right, which is the research side, doing the public opinion research that any one of the existing partner organizations, particularly in the climate environmental sector, individually wouldn't have the resources to invest in statewide polling and focus groups, but together, by pooling resources, we're able to collaborate on this kind of thing. So as we built up the campaign and thought about what it would take to win big on climate policy in 2016 and in the future, we're really looking at these number of policies, several of which we're focused on, clean fuels, coal and renewables, and carbon pricing, and try to figure out what's the right pathway to each one of these policies. The ballot measure we felt like was an important tool that we should add to our toolbox. It's a commonly used political instrument in a number of Western states and states across the country, but one that has been less commonly used by the environmental and the climate community. But the thing about a ballot measure, it's a very blunt instrument. You have to write very simple policies that voters can really grapple with and understand. And so for more complicated policies, like carbon pricing, it can be really difficult. And we found, for example, in Oregon, that we were not able to settle on a pathway policy for carbon pricing that was simple enough for voters to get their brains around, but that coal and renewables offered voters a very clean and concise choice at the ballot. So why a ballot measure is a particularly potent tool for us as climate activists is that it offers an opportunity to really build a campaign to a massive scale. For us in Oregon, gathering 100,000 or 150,000 signatures is a big operation. It gives our leaders and our volunteers and our coalition partners something to really grapple on and to engage with in a significant way. It's a very grassroots apparatus. It's also one where there's an opportunity to win and lose, and so that the results are really crystal clear. And then the last thing I'll say is that a ballot measure when you win a ballot measure, it sends a very clear signal to lawmakers that the public is on your side. The opposite is true. It is a high-risk scenario, right? So we took the process of selecting a ballot measure very seriously, and we're very careful to try to conduct the kind of research that would allow us to land on a ballot measure concept that really could have a reasonable and viable and clear path to victory, because we didn't think that losing was a path to victory. Once we got to the stage that Kristen has described after the utilities came to us and said, let's try to figure out a way to move this together through the legislature rather than duking it out at the ballot, we became more of a typical legislative campaign. We have this picture on the screen because this is the daily gaggle of the 20-plus lobbyists between the climate, clean energy, and utility folks who gathered every day in the Capitol to exchange notes and figure out how to collaborate to move the bill through. This is a really big group for our team. We don't usually have this many people on our side. And I want to say that because I think it's important to know how big and tough it can be to win a real campaign. Obviously, we know how hard these things are to win. But the other lesson for us was this wasn't nearly enough. Even with this many lobbyists, we needed a really big outside game to supplement the work happening inside the building. Which brings us to the work that we did outside the building, particularly in the earned media and communications and digital strategies, where we thought that we would have some attention on the bill, but that it would not receive a huge amount of media coverage. It turned out that we had almost a day-to-day, hand-to-hand combat effort that we had to manage with the media, managing reporters, managing spokespeople, reaching out to editorial boards all across the state, making sure we had the right people in the right editorial boards. We did 2 rounds of op-eds placed in a 8-week period. We did 2 rounds of op-eds across the state and newspapers across the state. And this took a team of 5, really, focused on it. Again, a reminder to all of us as we plan the next campaign about the scale at which we need to operate in order to win, even when we are successful in bringing some of our opponents over to join us on our side. One last note I'll say is that the message frame that we developed at the beginning, which was a deal between opposing parties, was helpful and it hurt us. That we got caught into a conversation with the media where they just started, and the opposition started to describe this as a backroom deal between special interests rather than a consensus and compromise between the utilities and the clean energy advocates. So it cut both ways. In the legislative space, having an aggressive and well-resourced digital program can be a really valuable tool because it is such a flexible campaign tactic or campaign tool. We had a series of online social media and email graphics that we put out and were put out through the echo chamber of the coalition partners almost every day, putting out new content designed to drive a message of momentum, so that if lawmakers were going to try to stop this, that they were working against overwhelming public support and momentum, driving up the visibility, using digital to demonstrate to lawmakers that there was everyday increasing support of the campaign. And backing that up by having a day-to-day advertising budget on social media in particular, targeting that budget to a very narrow universe of opinion leaders, decision makers. We did a whole mini campaign of display ads inside the Capitol only, targeting IP addresses within the Capitol building itself. Very cheap, but very high profile to those people who were making the decision. And the last thing I'll say is, as much as we're focused on the nuts and bolts of getting over the victory, sometimes it's really important to have fun too. So we worked with our partners on a campaign that we called Kiss Coal Goodbye. Started with a little video created just for free inside the office using, the video camera on a phone, and then launched that, put a little bit of advertising money behind the video in order to get a bunch of attention. It spiraled. I think we got 85,000 views or so, and several dozen to 100 people sending in their own pictures with themselves of kissing coal goodbye. It's kind of an interactive, playful game to make people appreciate, feel, and enjoy the victory together.
Thanks, Thomas. Next up is Janet Castellum. Jana is the Program Director of Climate at Oregon Environmental Council. She leads state and regional work for healthy, low-carbon, and equitable communities. She has a decade of experience building coalitions and advocating for climate policies. Jana.
Thanks, Mara. So I have the job of talking about what comes next. So it was really a tremendous victory, Oregon being the first state to not only transition off coal, but really think about a clean energy replacement strategy. But as we all know, climate change isn't solved, and our job is not done yet. I have up in front of us on the slide a picture of what Oregon's greenhouse gas trajectory really is. And granted, these numbers don't include the achievements from the Clean Electricity and Coal Transition Bill. But really, with population growth, we're expected to have about 4.8 million people in Oregon by 2030. And a lot of continued kind of status quo thinking. Our emissions are still projected to increase, and thankfully they won't increase quite as much now with this bill, but we still have a transportation sector that has rapidly growing emissions, particularly from the freight sector, and what we really need to do is get down to at least 14 million metric tons of climate pollution by 2050. So our work is yet to be done. And this is important because, again, climate change hasn't been solved yet, and each jurisdiction really needs to do its fair share of emissions reductions to get down to safe and stable levels. And the way I've been thinking about this is, if we have a castle that we're trying to guard, our job isn't done if we've only built half a moat. We are still vulnerable. And indeed, climate change creates vulnerabilities for all of us, whether we are businesses that have global supply chains that could be disrupted by extreme weather, whether we're part of the agricultural sector and we're worried about drought or erratic rainfall, whether we have kids who have asthma. All of these things are vulnerabilities for our economy and our health and our way of life. And so our job is not done yet. And Oregon certainly has a responsibility to continue to innovate and to share out our victories and our how-tos, which is exactly what we're doing here today. And those who can do more really need to do more. If a house is on fire and you've carried one bucket of water and you're able to carry another bucket of water, you absolutely should be doing that. So looking at the horizon for what comes next, I think I may not have had my last slide come in. It's okay. It was actually the opportunities for what comes next. So on the horizon, we have the transportation package. And there are a number of ways that we can make sure that it's a future-forward climate-smart package. We need to be thinking about, how we make sure to fix our infrastructure that we already have and not build a lot of new infrastructure that's going to actually increase greenhouse gas emissions. Right now is not the time to be digging ourselves further in a hole. We need to support alternative means of transportation, transit operations, making sure that people are able to do bike and safe walking. There's a number of ways that we can really make this both a business-friendly, climate-friendly, and people-friendly transportation package. We also need to think about how we're going to continue to look at our overarching limits to climate pollution. And Oregon has climate goals that are aspirational, but are not mandatory yet. And until I think we really commit to a specific level of emissions reduction and think about all the different parts and pieces that we need to get there, we're going to continue to miss and exceed our climate goals. And so what is that greenhouse gas cap or limit that we can put in place? What is that interim target? And then what are the tools that we need to hit that cap? We will have a really interesting best practices type of analysis that will be carried out this year by the Department of Environmental Quality that was passed last session to really look at market-based mechanisms for helping to reduce emissions. And then, of course, what we do with any carbon revenue will also be really important. What are our smartest reinvestment strategies, again, to take care of the things we care about in Oregon, vulnerable populations, our health, and our economic prosperity and job creation. There's also some really interesting conversations about not only the big climate pollutant, CO2, or carbon dioxide, but things called super pollutants, or the short-lived climate pollutants that are much, much, much more potent than carbon dioxide and are shorter-lived, but they're emitted in lower quantities as well. And so we're very interested to take a look at what that looks like here in Oregon as well for potentially some near-term emissions reduction. And these are things like refrigerants and black carbon that comes out of tailpipes. And then other things that could be a possibility to look at are things within our built environment. While our energy will become cleaner, there's still a tremendous amount of energy demand from our buildings. And Oregon traditionally has been a leader in innovating really strong, good building energy codes, but we're now starting to lag in our region. Washington and California are moving ahead towards a zero net energy code, and Oregon is not keeping pace. And every building we build today will stay with us through the end of the century. So these buildings are very important. It's critical that we build them right the first time around. So that's an opportunity to look about how we can accelerate our achievements in the built environment, as well as looking at how we continue to really make great strides in retrofits and enhancing energy efficiency through our industrial practices as well. My time is up, so I'm going to hand this over.
Terrific. So lastly, we have Amy Hochnowski, who joined the Sierra Club Beyond Coal campaign as a senior campaign representative in 2013. She has directed legislative, electoral, and issue advocacy campaigns, as well as communications and fundraising projects on behalf of many progressive organizations since moving to Oregon in 1999. I'm going to hand it over to Amy and just remind everyone, if you have questions, please submit them via the Q&A function on the upper right of your screen. Amy, go ahead.
Yes, there we go. Hey everyone, so glad to be here. Thanks so much for joining, and looking forward to the Q&A after. So I'm just going to talk briefly about how this historic victory in Oregon really fits into the bigger goals of creating a carbon-free grid in the U.S., the impacts that we've already started to see in the Western region in the aftermath of the bill, and where we're headed next. So I wanted to start with this beautiful picture of the states we have now joined as coal-free. The Sierra Club Beyond Coal campaign, really works across the country to utilize all the levers at our disposal to directly accelerate retirement of a unit or plant through regulatory efforts, legal means, or when necessary at the ballot or in our state legislatures, using targeted state-based campaigns. Oregon, of course, was the first state to pass a law that directly ended coal use by a date certain. But in doing so, we joined the ranks of just a few other states who have found their best path forward to being coal-free as well. The final straw for our Oregon campaign was the moment our broad coalition turned our opposition, the utilities, into our advocates. But that came after a decade of work, galvanizing public support, building a broad coalition, educating legislators, working the earned, paid, and social media, and exposing the true economics of coal, the health impacts of coal, and the direct link to our climate crisis that coal use is exacerbating, allowing us to make the clear case that the coal era is ending and a transition to clean energy is affordable, possible, and very, very popular. Oregon spoke loud and clear to coal investors around the world when we said that your product is not wanted here anymore. Zooming out a little more, we can see that as of today, 233 coal plants are either retired or proposed for retirement, representing over 102,000 megawatts of dirty energy. a huge step along the way that gets us, the Sierra Club Coal Campaign, to our 2017 target goal of nearly 150,000 megawatts of coal energy. Part of our theory of change is that the more coal we push out of the pie, the more room we open up for clean, renewable energy to compete for their fair share of the market. And some great news came out this week out of the FERC report for quarter one, shows that renewable energy comprised nearly all of the new capacity added in the United States this year so far, 1,291 megawatts, compared to only 18 megawatts of new gas capacity and no nuclear and, of course, no new coal capacity. That represents more than 700 megawatts of wind and 500 megawatts of solar added in the first quarter of this year alone from a combined 53 new generating facilities. So the Oregon law really only adds to that momentum that helps facilitate this exciting new dynamic that even just a few years ago we were aspirationally hoping for, but are thrilled to see it coming to fruition. So it's really only been a short while since the law was signed, but we've already seen signs of the impact that it's having already. The economics of coal continue to decline as the West Coast consumer markets say we are done paying for coal. The movement of those load states like Oregon, California, and Washington will help the generation states like Montana, Utah, and Wyoming to provide the rationale needed for accelerating retirement of coal plants ahead of the extended depreciation dates, some of which bring us into the 2040s, 2050s, which we all know is far too long to deal with the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. So first, we've seen that the beleaguered coal strip in Montana has had, our law has already had impacts there. Our law has been cited by everyone from CEOs, plant operators, and governors as creating significant additional pressure on the utilities, we believe, to finally unload their shares in Colstrip's units 3 and 4, the newer of the plant's units. Combined with the Clean Power Plan targets for Montana and the new law out of Washington creating a fund for closure and cleanup of units 1 and 2, we believe early retirement timelines for Colstrip are all but certain. The market for the power from the plant is nearly gone, and the public support is not with them. Investors want out. Other positive signs coming so far, even it's only been, a month and a half, has it had 2 months since we passed our bill. Other positive signs that have come out so far, the PacifiCorp IRP update. PacifiCorp runs the Pacific Power in Oregon, and their IRP update just months ago showed a change in their plans. They are now changing from converting their Naughton plant from gas to setting it on a retirement schedule. And both of the IOU utilities in Oregon have now put out RFPs for renewable projects when their previous planning documents showed no demonstrated need for new renewables. These are big shifts that our law had a direct impact on. On the next slide, I wanted to show a little bit about the international impact that our work in the U.S. is having. We can see that our work is being noticed on the international stage. Just right now, with the G7 conference happening, the U.S. is showing that they are playing a lead role on coal plant closures and creating the room for a shift to clean energy. The work that we have done here in Oregon, as well as recent victories in New York and as well as Alberta, are all concrete examples where policymakers are finally courageous enough, with smart campaigning, to stand up against coal and in favor of large amounts of clean energy. Our little Oregon bill is getting a lot of attention internationally as countries try to find the right path for them to also go coal-free. And they look to our state-based campaigns as models to replicate. We are transforming the electric sector across the world, campaign by campaign. But of course, our job isn't done. The Sierra Club and our partners are really working hard to decarbonize the Western grid by 2030 by continuing to create the leverage and pressure to keep the coal in the ground through divestment campaigns, retirements, strong EPA enforcement with regional haze requirements, the looming expectations of the Clean Power Plan, and beating back one export terminal after another, as well as proactively fighting for clean energy to get a fair shot in the market. With that, I'm done. We're ready for some questions, I think. Pass back to Mara.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Amy. First question I want to ask is what, in passing this bill, Thomas referenced that even bringing together sort of the unlikely allies of utilities and advocates, that there were some, that it was still more challenging, it was more challenging to pass than anticipated. What was the biggest opposition that the group encountered in trying to pass this legislation? What were the issues? How'd you overcome them?
This is Jana. I'll just jump in quickly with one thought. I think sometimes our biggest challenge is old thinking and conventional wisdom. I think people, especially legislators who maybe don't pay as much attention to energy markets, think coal is cheap and renewables are expensive. And the flip side is actually true. Coal is expensive and risky, and renewables, the prices are coming down dramatically and have much, much better long-term economics because you don't really have fuel costs for them. But keeping people up to date with progress is sometimes our biggest challenge. Sometimes people learn a fact or what they think is a fact, and it's hard to budge that thinking.
Great. The next question is, can you talk a little bit about labor's role, positive or negative in the campaign, and efforts that are being made to expand connections with labor?
Yeah, sure. This is Thomas. I think we are actively in the Oregon climate world, actively trying to build long-term relationships with the labor movement, both with the building trades and with other public and private sector unions. I'll say this was a hard part of this campaign. I think we know in Oregon and the climate sector that we need to transition off of coal. We also, because our only coal plant in-state is already slated to close, this is really about purchasing coal from plants outside of the state. So for Oregon unions that are representing workers in the state, this did not impact in terms of their membership because there are no coal members in the state. But it's certainly for IBEW that's representing workers in coal generating states, it was a hard conversation. And so that was some tension, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. I think the flip side to that was trying to make sure that we were developing a transition timeline and glide path that would ensure that we are ramping up renewable energy over time in order to make sure that there was not any significant disruption in terms of electricity supply or any significant change in terms of electricity costs. And in fact, our modeling showed that there would be short-term, very little impact on electricity prices as a result of this policy and long-term cost savings. And so I think that was helpful and reassuring to those labor partners that are focused on growing, for example, the data